This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Kadlick.
You are listening to the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Kadlick, part of the CLNS Media Network. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. All right, Greg, let's jump into some things here. You just wrote a column. I believe you called Vrabel's camp cake so far. How have things been a 180 from Mayo's camp last year?
Yeah, I mean, if people remember, and, look, people should know by now that I call it the way I see it. I mean, I didn't like the Gerard Mayo hiring last year, but when it came to, I thought he ran a really good camp. I thought it was tough. It was much more physical than Bill Belichick's camps, long practices. Like, it was like a normal training camp. And there were a couple sessions where they tackled to the ground.
Yeah.
And I praised Mayo. I thought he ran a good camp, and I thought it was part of the reason why they started the season relatively fast. They were 1-0. They had the lead in the fourth quarter against the Seahawks. Like, I was ready to say, like, I was wrong. Mayo knows what he's doing and blah, blah, blah. And then we know what happened after that. But Vrabel's camp, I mean, look, the jumping off point was it was a walkthrough today. Today was going to be a walkthrough anyways.
Yeah.
Because they have the joint practice with the Commanders tomorrow. So it's not about today, but this was the third walkthrough that they've had. And in sort of a departure from years past, like, we're talking like walkthrough. I mean, the guys come out in hats, sneakers, like, it's very low speed. Like, I don't think I've really seen that before. Most of the time you get jog throughs, or the guys are in shells at least, but it's like a day at the beach, these walkthroughs. So they've had as many walkthroughs, 3, as fully padded practices, 3. And, maybe a half of one with the in-stadium scrimmage that was, fully padded, but it was only like an hour long at max. Like, it was, so just, the whole thing. Vrabel obviously has a reason for what he does. He has a reason for for everything that he does. And I'm sure it's thought out and definitely has his reasons. But, between, the walkthroughs, the days that they could do more, that they're not doing more, veteran days off, Morgan Moses and Carlton Davis on, whatever plan they're on, the lack of contact, like, forget like tackling to the ground, or, Nick, people probably hear this term. It's called like thudding. And that's what they do in these practices. That's what every NFL team does. You'll occasionally get one practice or a couple sessions where they're like, this is live, tackle to the ground, get the guys ready. But most of the practices are thudding. And what that is they're in full pads. You meet the guy in the hole. You make a good pop initially, a thud. And normally it stops the receiver or runner in their tracks, but you just don't go to the ground. The Patriots don't even thud. It's really sort of like two-hand touch. I think I can recall 3, maybe 4 thuds, pops, where the crowd at Gillette Stadium, like, reacted, like, ooh, like, or everybody kind of reacted to it. That's happened like 3 times. That would have been Jabril Peppers in the first padded practice like 5 times in other years. So, like, look, this is without question the lightest training camp I have ever covered in the NFL. Of course, I can't go back, the 20 plus years that I've been here, because that's never coming back. But this is lighter than the latter years with Bill. Certainly, it's certainly much less physical and taxing than Mayo's last year. We'll see if it works out. I mean, last year we saw what happened with the Patriots ultimately. I'm sure Vrabel, some of it probably has to do with depth, the lack of depth. He doesn't want to get anybody hurt, even though they are having injuries, even with the relatively light camp. But it just makes you think. And, basically my column was about, like, I hope he's right, because what I was surprised to learn Vrabel's Tennessee teams actually don't start that fast. And
Yeah.
it was a criticism. He ran the same practices in Tennessee. It was a criticism up there. And so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you feel like it's been too easy of a camp. But again, you leave it open-ended because if it works, if they get off to a hot start, nobody's going to care how they handle July and August. If they get off to a great start, it is what it is. I want to get to some of the possible reasons in a little bit. But do you think it's actually, let me first ask you this. You mentioned the starts in Tennessee for Vrabel. I read your column before sitting down to do this podcast with you. He was 6-6 in Tennessee in those 4 seasons through the 12 games or whatever. So 6-6 to start the season for the Titans. Does that concern you? I mean, you look back and you say, well, that was an issue then. He hasn't necessarily corrected how he approaches it. Or do you just say to yourself, this must be a philosophy and Vrabel must be very principled when it comes to how to running a camp, and he's less worried about maybe a slow start than he is getting through the camp healthy?
Yeah. So just to give people the proper context in terms of Vrabel's starts. So he was there 6 seasons.
Yep.
In 4 of those 6 seasons, they lost the season opener, including his last 3. They lost to the Saints in 2023, 16-15. They lost to the Giants 21-20 in 22. They got shellacked by the Cardinals 38-13 in 2021. They won the next 2, and then his first one they lost. And that number 6-6, that is, just to give proper context, that's the 3 game starts in the 4 seasons when they lost their season opener.
All right.
So, but in general, Nick, yes, it gives me pause and it makes me question if this is the right thing. Has he learned from that? It doesn't seem like it. I reached out to Paul Kaharski, who sort of does the independent thing, covering the Titans. He's covered them for years, including Vrabel's years. He immediately, because I asked him, I was like, hey, did Mike sort of run like, camps where, they didn't hit and giving guys off? And he's like, oh yeah. He like answered like right away. And it was a big criticism there because of, losing those season openers and getting off to, I wouldn't say slow starts, just not fast starts. And but look, if I went back and I looked and I saw that the Tennessee Titans started great under Vrabel and this is the approach that he took, I'd be like, Vrabel sure as hell knows what he's doing. This is proven. It's worked for him in the past. The opposite is true. So, yeah, it makes me sort of question if this is the right approach. But like you said, if they get off to a fast start, nobody's going to care. If Morgan Moses ends up starting all 17 games at right tackle and Carlton Davis, by some miracle, starts 17 games at left cornerback for the Patriots, and it probably was because of how Vrabel handled them in camp in the preseason and things like that, nobody's going to care, and they're going to celebrate the approach. But I think it's valid to bring up. It's a point of discussion, especially when you consider Vrabel's history in Tennessee.
And it's fascinating because part of that history, Greg, that you don't include in your column is that Vrabel, at least for 2 seasons down in Tennessee, he dealt with a bunch of injuries. I mean, to a comical level. And you can almost look at this in 2 ways. You can look at it, say, all right, well, maybe, going through that experience, maybe that made him even more emboldened to say, let's not go too hard in camp because we just went through a couple of seasons where everybody was hurt. And, let's make sure these guys get to week 1 healthy. You could argue, though, well, maybe part of the problem those 2 years that you went through the rash of injuries was because guys weren't particularly ready from a physical standpoint because you didn't go as hard. So it's very interesting to think about some of those injury issues that his Titans teams had with the context of how he runs practice. I've got to ask you, do you think that they'll ramp up at any point and he's just trying to get through the joint practices and going especially soft, easy, whatever we want to say, early on because of that?
I don't think so. I was sort of laying out the future schedule, for them and what I anticipate. So you have the padded practice tomorrow. They'll be off. than the game against the Commanders. Who knows who plays? I don't think a lot of people are going to play. Certainly, like these veterans. Like I bet you like Harold Landry, Keon White got held out of the in-stadium scrimmage. Why? He's been out there for everything else. Why wouldn't he practice? I don't think many people are going to play. They'll probably play the rest of the offensive line, because those rookies, Campbell and Wilson, they need as many reps as possible, work with Drake a little bit. I think they'll practice, but I think the final Foxboro practice is going to be on Sunday. Since that's the first practice after a game, that could be a walkthrough again. I think on Monday they'll have a fully padded practice, and then they'll walk through, travel to Minnesota, and then they'll have one. Normally, because they have two practices with the Vikings, just one with the Commanders. Normally, the way those things go is full pads on the first day, shells on the second day, maybe like a jog through type of thing with the other team. And then, that's possibly it. So no, I don't really think they're going to ramp up. And I'm actually very interested to see how they handle who's participating in these joint practices, especially the veterans, the iffy guys, the preseason, things like that. Like I could see, and in my column, I put something that Kaharski had written in the wake of the blowout loss to the Cardinals. And he was heavily criticizing Vrabel for not having the starting offense together. And they came out and they played awful in the first game, and it had like penalties. So I could see a scenario where we're talking about where Morgan Moses, never plays. Is Steph Diggs going to get any reps in games? Probably, I would say the joint practices he'll definitely take part in. I think we're going to be talking about this stuff.
All right. For those listening, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, leave a review. For those watching the show on CLNS, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Patriots Press Pass YouTube channel, where you can find our show, a lot of other great Patriots content. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know when the big boy has a new video for you. They will instantly let you know when that drops. Also, check out Bedard and Giardi over at BSJ, $50 for the year, tag teaming the Patriots coverage, doing a great job as they always do. All right, just a couple of more questions about this practice approach, and then I want to get to some rapid-fire questions heading into this joint practice with Washington. Again, history shows that Vrabel has approached camp like he's approaching it this year. But how much could the free agency play into this? And what I mean by that is, you mentioned, Morgan Moses, 34. Carlton Davis, with his injury history, I believe he's 29. He might be 28, turning 29. Landry, late 20s. Spillane, late 20s. Does that make Vrabel even more steadfast at saying to himself, we're not going to go hard because, A, that's what I do, but especially B, we brought in a lot of important players to lead this team and lead the culture, and all those guys are older, so I don't want to screw around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could definitely be valid, Nick. And also, let's also throw in, Diggs and Epps, who are both coming back from recent ACL surgery. And so, maybe Vrabel just looks at the totality. I mean, they brought in, let's say older guys to, bring up the floor on this team, but a lot of them are very experienced. So I could very much see it that he looks at it and says, I'm more worried about week 17 than I am July and August. That could definitely be the case.
I touched on this on one of my solo pods going back a few weeks ago about how Vrabel was approaching it much differently than Mayo. And one of the things that I thought of that could play a role into this, and I didn't do as much digging as you did looking back in past years in Tennessee, which is great by you. And I didn't look at how he handled camp with Tennessee and all that stuff. But one question I had was, when you look back at Mayo's camp, as you said, they went pretty hard, relatively speaking, in 2024. But they also had a bye week in week 14. And I wonder, is that a part of this as well? Where it's like, if we go hard and then we get into the season, we don't have a bye week until week 14. Our guys are going to be cashed by week 10, week 11. And we're going to be dragging ass the last 3-4 weeks before we get to that bye. So let's go a little bit easier on the front end so we can make sure we can get to that bye week, hopefully okay.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, and really, we're talking about what I'm talking about. Like so far, um, there's probably like 3 days where three of the work days where um, they could have done something more. I just think the way things are divvied up, especially like you basically have like a bye week after the final preseason game. There's like 10 days, I think, or something
Yeah.
like that until the first game. And like once you get into preseason, you got a day off before a game. Some guys aren't playing in games. You got a day off after the game. Like I think there's plenty of time to pace it. I just would have I don't see a whole ton of downside on being a little bit more intense in the first, 2 weeks of training camp, but obviously Vrabel thinks otherwise.
I also wonder how much analytics plays a role into this, because when Vrabel's been asked about analytics and how much he uses the analytics, a lot of times he talks about player recovery, player injury, and all those things. So I wonder how much that plays a role. Final question for you.
Nick, one thing on that real quick,
Sure.
because it just popped into my mind. Like you said, Vrabel could have actual data because now these guys are all wearing those. I think they're catapult or something
Yeah.
like that. They look like jogging bras when you see them out there.
They do look like sports bras. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they have all this real time data on these guys, and maybe some of these iffy days, like Vrabel could have pushed it, but he looked at the data on the guys and saw most of them were starting to go down. Like, let me give you two examples of guys that I think where this. Well, I don't know. Two guys where I think this has been a factor. Like, Will Campbell with the end of the week that he had last week, talking to people around the team, they thought that he had, it's his first NFL training camp. They thought he had sort of tired legs towards the end of the week. And that was a reason why he had some struggles. But then also you look at Keon White and he doesn't take part in the in-stadium scrimmage. I wouldn't say he was like dominating or anything like that, but so they hold him out that day. Saturday and Sunday are off days, and then he comes out on Monday and he was a freaking beast. He was 4-0 in one-on-ones.
Yeah.
So maybe that's data telling them to do that, and that's where I would say, good job with that.
And I'm sure if Vrabel has his own reasons looking back at the seasons, now I'm going to rhyme everything. I'm sure he has the reasons for looking back at the seasons and saying to himself, yeah, look, you could blame it on the camp, but this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. I'm sure there are other things that Vrabel would point to as far as that 6-6 record that you mentioned, given the context and some of the slow starts. I'm sure he'd have his own reasoning. Not to say that it's right, but in his head, he might say, the camp is like reason number 5 or 6, maybe. There were other things there. Last question, though. How are people in the building feeling about this approach?
Good question. I'm so preoccupied with personnel, and like when I get people on the phone, like I'm trying to figure out like what's going on and seeing if my thoughts on the team are lining up and things like that. So I haven't really asked that. No one's brought it up and been like, this is camp cake as I am calling it or anything. But I think overall they feel really good about what's going on with the team.
All right. I've got some rapid fire, but first, don't forget CLNS YouTube channels, CLNS Media Network, Celtics All Access on CLNS for behind-the-scenes content, segments from many Celtics podcasts from CLNS, NBA History Channel, Patriots Press Pass, Bruins Ringside. You can check it all out. And don't forget to download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 instantly when you play $5.
Prize Picks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. On Prize Picks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports, combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, golf, auto racing, anything you want, you can find it on there. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Prize Picks also offers weekly productions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Download your app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
Greg's going to run in about 10 minutes or so to do Felger and Maz, as I always say. God bless you, sir. Hope you do well. But let's run through some rapid fire quickly. Your offensive line evaluation heading into this joint practice against Washington.
I would say when they're all out there and healthy, I'm still on the positive side of things. I know that Will Campbell has had some rough days. Didn't finish the week strong last week, didn't have a great day yesterday. I will say he's doing fine in team, and that's, really, what matters. He is having some issues one-on-one, dealing with speed on the outside. It's really his initial punch that, sometimes he's missing or not getting enough of the player, and that's just going to be trial and error. He's going to learn. I will say this, talking to people around the team, the panic that you hear about Will Campbell and the offensive line and things like that, there's none of that internally. They feel really good about where they are. I would agree with them to an extent. I mean, I do, Campbell has a long ways to go. There's a month until the season starts. There's plenty of time. I feel really good about Jared Wilson. I think he's been tremendous. Bradbury, we'll see. He's fine in the run game, the pass game. McDaniels is going to have to scheme around that and know the limitations, and he's great at that. Owenu has been really good. Moses has been good for the most part when he's been out there. So, I'm okay with it. I don't have the panic that you hear on Sports Talk Radio.
All right, how about the offense overall? I did an episode on Locked On Patriots, that podcast that I do. You can check it out if you'd like. And I talked about TreVeyon Henderson. And a lot of people talked about TreVeyon Henderson being just a huge impact player, especially during Monday's practice. But the offense overall, Greg, I know in the low red zone area they've had some mighty struggles. The high red zone, they've been a little bit better. But overall, how do you feel about the offense?
I think they're making progress. The reaction internally to the in-stadium scrimmage where, certainly Drake May's unit was choppy. And this was my opinion at the time. I couldn't really judge because, Drake May's out there with Mekhi Butler, who's like the last guard on the team.
Yeah.
He's throwing to different people. Like, it's not a normal evaluation situation. And but I think they're making progress. I'm excited about, I think Diggs is pacing himself. I think Henderson has shown up really well. I think Stevenson, outside the fumble, has been really good. I think the run blocking, which people don't really talk about, I think has been really good at times. That's shown a lot of improvement over the course of camp. Their quick game is really good. And they're developing the timing there. We've seen guys step up. Booty and Baker are both. Remember last year we talked about how nobody was showing improvement. Everybody was going backward. Booty and Baker have all gotten better. Everybody's getting better. Are they thin in spots? Yeah. But I feel pretty good. I think when we get to the season and if they're healthy, I think they have the pieces to be at least sort of like an average offense, and that's all we're sort of looking for at this point.
I want to ask about Baker. He was through in the walkthrough today. He was with the other, as you would say, top 5 receivers, right? We're talking about Diggs, we're talking about Douglas, we're talking about Hollins, we're talking about Williams, we're talking about Booty, and then it was Baker. He's pushing seemingly for that 6th wide receiver spot, isn't he, Greg?
Yeah, I would say that. Baker was with the top receivers in a similar walkthrough practice. So it wasn't news that was the case today, but he's doing a better job. And, and there's no question a guy like Booty who, going into this, we're just like, it doesn't seem like he's long for this team. He definitely has a spot on this team now. And, I think Baker's making slow progress. Bourne being out. Chisholm has had a slow start. But yeah, he's definitely in competition.
All right, tell me about Marcus Bryant. Big boy Bedard's breaking down the Marcus Bryant film. Tell me how you feel about him. Is he showing promise as at least a possible backup tackle for this team?
I think backup might be a stretch, at least at this point. We'll see how the joints go. He's fine. He definitely has talent. He has potential. It's unrefined. I wouldn't say that he's a raw, like, total project. But I don't know if I would be comfortable with him as a backup swing tackle. He would be more, I want like a redshirt year for him, be like the inactive guy. I think he's going to make the roster just because he's talented and has potential. But I'm hoping Vidarian Lowe, who just started practicing again, probably another guy who's not going to take part in much coming up. But I hope that Lowe's clearly the next best tackle on this team. But Jacobs hasn't been bad. I just think that Lowe's better. But I guess Bryant has a chance. That would just surprise me, though.
All right, we'll end with this one. I want to end with defense. I was reading your 53-man roster projection at some point over the last couple of days, and Kyle Duggar, very interesting to me. You had Duggar out there as a trade candidate. You mentioned in your column, start the Craig Woodson era. Let's get this thing going. Is it possible that the Patriots started to slowly get to the Craig Woodson era in Monday's practice by, as you posted, giving Woodson some more reps and Duggar maybe taking a step back in reps with the ones?
That's the way I read it. And, I would say, from talking to people around the team, I would say that Duggar's future with this team is muddled. And I don't know if they're going to be able to trade him with his contract. He gets $14.5 million a year.
Yeah.
And over the cap evaluated him at like 1.5 million last year. And we know he was hurt and things like that. But, some of the same stuff we've seen, he's the same player he's always been. He'll make a couple of splash plays and then, he'll have a momentary lapse of focus and they'll pop him, over the head for a touchdown. And they have so many guys at safety who are, solid players, more assignment sure. Jalen Hawkins, Marcus Epps as he gets more healthy, Woodson, even a guy like Del Pettis, of course, Jabril Peppers has had a major role under Vrabel from basically day one here. It's just very crowded. And, Duggar's going to have to do some things in these joint practices and in the preseason, I think, to solidify his spot on this team.
Interesting. Well, you go on and do God's work with Felger and Maz. I hope all goes well there. We are planning to be back, both of us, on Thursday. The joint practice is on Wednesday. Greg's going to take that in person. Then we'll be back on Thursday to talk about that. Maybe a little bit of a preview of the preseason game. That should be a really good podcast. You guys are not going to want to miss that one. But until then, we wish all of you well. Bye-bye.